Thank you very much. I just came to Tokyo 2 days ago, and I found the weather in Tokyo is much cooler, and my brain starts working maybe better. I shouldn't say that. Manila is also a very good place to work. This is 20th anniversary of ADB Institute, and it is now being supported by more donors, including Korea and China, and also Indonesia is now starting supporting this, in addition to big contribution from Japan. And I think under the strong leadership of Dean Yoshino, it is playing a very important role of knowledge sharing and also new works regarding the SME finance, especially inclusive finance is a very important agenda, and the impact of infrastructure investment. There are many talks about the importance of strengthening infrastructure investment in Asia. But what is the impact of infrastructure? How should we collect the cost of infrastructure? Can we have a very effective way of mobilizing resources also from private sector, including the people and businesses enjoying the result of infrastructure investment. Today's topic is private sector debt and also the local finance. I'd like to touch upon these issues a little bit later, but today, taking this opportunity, I'd like to share with you some new developments, recent developments in Asian economies, and the discussions about the role of multilateral development banks in the international community. As you should, of course, know, and there are materials of these kinds on the table, and ADB has 48 regional economies who are members, including Hong Kong, China, Taipei, China. These countries are members of 48 regional developing member countries. Three are originally from origin. Japan, Australia, New Zealand have never been borrowing developing member countries, but Hong Kong, China, and Taipei, China are in the separate consciency from PRC, People's Republic of China. We have so many Central Asian countries, and there is a lot of discussion about Belt and Road Initiative and how China and PRC, Belt and Road Initiative, and ADB and other multilateral institutions, and also other bilateral donors like Japan and others can cooperate is one of the issues in Central Asia and Mekong region, South Asia. There is a lot of, by the way, this is the country data, and you can tell the difference of size, and China's GDP is now $11 trillion, and more than double of Japan, and India is now growing very steadily, and Indonesia with a population of 280 million, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines already above 100, and Vietnam is 92. So Asia as a whole has a very big population, more than half of the world population, and in this region, per capita GDP is growing as well as the scale of the total economy. So Asia is still growth center, and you can see that developing Asia growth has been a little bit less than 6%, but it's very solid growth, and if it is 7% in 10 years, it is doubling. So 6% is a little bit less than that, but close to that. And especially I want to highlight excluding newly industrialized economies, that is Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Taipei, China, and Korea. It is growing at a pace of 6.4 or 6.3%. And China still keeps relatively solid growth, and we adjusted 2017 forecast a little bit upward to 6.7%, the same level with the previous year, although over years it will be moderating. India is still keeping high growth more than China, and there is a discussion about possible negative impact from demonetization, removing big amount bills. There is still certain effect, but Reserve Bank of India is now reducing interest rate because the inflation rate is more stable. Indonesia, under the President Widodo's very strong leadership, is spending more for infrastructure and for addressing inequality between regions. Pakistan is facing challenging conditions, especially about securities, but still it is growing rather solid pace. The Prime Minister has been changed it, and the political situation is still a little bit volatile, but growth rate is better than many people expect. Bangladesh is also enjoying high growth. Myanmar, Rakhine situations and other difficult issues, but as far as growth rate is concerned, it is still growing very fast. Thailand has been always in short of the beginning year's expectations because of continued political uncertainties, and the general election will be expected next year, and I hope that there will be more political stability and stronger growth. Korea is still growing at the pace of 2.8%, and per capita GDP is now coming closer to other OECD members. Korea is, of course, one of OECD members. So, in terms of growth, I think Korea is doing rather well. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about China, because China's mere GDP is very large, and growth rate is still very high. But there are some risks, and it is slowing down. But in a sense, until 2010 or 28, until global financial crisis, the growth rate was peculiarly high, and because of trade and because of catching up to other economies. But China growth, because of there are several reasons, and the cyclical factors, excess capacity in some sectors, and financial sector stability is, in a sense, a very important policy objective. Structural factors, the rebalancing from investment to consumption-driven, from industry to service-driven is objective, and it can cause a little bit kind of adjustment in the growth rate, and the declining work age population, and of course convergence to developed countries. So it is very natural that China is now, in a sense, having more moderate growth. But as I said, one of the issues is consumption share of GDP. In other words, investment share of GDP, including public investment, is very large. And this is financed by the debt of local authority related related financial platforms. And real estate investment by private sector is also posing a question whether it is bubble or not. So in most of countries, developed countries, consumption ratio of GDP is 60 to 70%, or even in Philippines it is even higher. So China's growth pattern based on the very significant investment in public works, real estate, factory facilities, whether those have been efficient investment in terms of productivity gains and so on. That is question, and China is now trying to shift to more consumption and more services, and services is now becoming larger share of the GDP production. So about China, I had a chance of having 3 hours and a half kind of a candid discussion with the Minister Shao last week. When he came to last week on Tuesday, and Tuesday, not last week, but the week before last. The time passes by very quickly. And we had 3 hours and a half discussion at my office of ADB, and it was a great honor that Minister of Finance of China came over to ADB building, and it was between 7:50 and 11:20 in the evening, and he mentioned that we can continue to discuss these issues until dawn, but I said we can do it maybe next time. But we discussed so many issues about ADB's relation with China, and my idea is that it's better for ADB to continue to lend to China, because although per capita GDP is now growing, there are still kind of areas ADB can support China, and China is welcoming it, such as climate change and also water management, pollutions. And we have a very big project at the Greater Beijing capital region for air pollution. And we now have Yangtze River, the riverside comprehensive development plan, including water management, water pollutions, and how to make the areas along river makes more livable green cities. So by doing that, ADB can enjoy the sharing knowledge with China, and by doing things together, it's not just ADB is providing knowledge support to China, but we can learn things each other, which can be used for other countries. And our lending to China and other middle-income countries is not subsidizing, and it is funding cost plus spread, and lending to China and other countries, middle-income countries, make our lending portfolio more balanced, which means for keeping AAA, capital ratio can be smaller, or in other words, we can lend more by having such country. But in any case, China's has been member, PRC has been member of ADB for these 30 years, and I think we can still do many things together. That is one element of discussions with the Minister Shao. And also I said we are committed to making positive attitude or cooperation between ADB and the Asian infrastructure investment bank and also new development bank. ADB has already co-financed 4 projects with the AIIB, and those were in Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and Georgia, and we are still trying to do more, and there are a large number of pipelines in our projects, so we'll continue to do so. About the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, we have promoted the Regional Cooperation Initiative or Sub-Region Initiatives for years, and we started Greater Mekong Sub-Regions, including Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, and southern part of Chinese provinces, and Myanmar, since early 1990s. And after the Vietnam and other countries became more integrated to international system after reform of Vietnam and reconciliations with the United States, which was very difficult. There was difficult discussions after the Vietnam War ended in 1970s, but in 1990s they started being involved, more engaged in the international economic system. We also have been supporting what we call CAREC initiative, Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation. We started it in late 90s. We means ADB started this in late 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet system and connectivity, how to re-establish a division of labor between these republics of the Soviet system was a very imminent agenda. So Belt and Road Initiative is not new idea to us, and to connect, to enhance connectivity between countries is a very important agenda in terms of transport, energy, and other important infrastructure. So with the BRI, and also BRI is not new from the perspective of Chinese history, because of even in Tang Dynasty or even Han Dynasty before the Christ, there was a connectivity anyway. So we can cooperate as appropriate, and we means ADB and the BRI can cooperate, and but at the same time, ADB's stance is we adhere to very rigorous safeguard policies of social and environmental impact. And when we start the project, there should be economic reasons or viabilities. So any infrastructure projects should have the viability and also the efficiency or productivity over the long run. We discussed these issues. We have been discussing these issues. This is the 5th time I personally met Minister Xiao of China government from beginning of this year. But about the Chinese economies, one of the issues is related to today's one. That's why I want to discuss a little bit about China. And Chinese July this year, National Financial Work Conference was held, and that kind of discussion has been lingering or has been discussed for couple of years already. But China authorities clearly regards situations of financial stability in China should be taken care very well. And according to this work conference conclusion paper, systemic risk control is an eternal theme of Chinese economy. And they decided to have a financial work, financial stability and development committee, including central bank and regulators divided to security, banking, and insurance, and Ministry of Finance. So SOE borrowing, local borrowing, leverage of banking system, shadow banking, and zombie companies which cause bad debt issues. They clearly regard these issues as a very important challenge. And there is a question whether there are bubbles in real estate and investment by companies. Over capacity is one of the important issues for industrial sectors. And some regions, like northeastern part of China, is more suffering from coastal region. So how to adjust, how to make a smooth and efficient transitions of these industries is one of the very important issues. There is a question that whether China is now moving toward what kind of directions is it going? And one issue is the third plenum of Central Committee in 2013 clearly stated that market should play a decisive role in the resource allocation. And that kind of remark is also mentioned in the party's new constitution after this autumn's party congress. But at the same time, there is a kind of SOE reforms which makes SOE stronger and sometimes bigger by merging them. And also there is a mentioning of the importance of public ownership of companies or assets. So that is a very central element of a socialist idea or communist idea. Is there any contradiction? And that is one of the questions, but I shouldn't quote minister's remark, but generally the Chinese idea is that SOE should be governed by the market principle, and the public ownership is used for the welfare of the people, including pollution control, anti-corruptions, and providing better environment for workers, and so on. So the Chinese system regards public ownership is a very important instrument to provide welfare to people. And also the SOE and private companies like Alibaba and others, many IT companies or new areas companies are totally private. And so if there are different kind of companies, and still if they are governed by market principle, including SOE, that is a market, more decisive role by the market. But the question is whether if there is a more emphasis of government guidance or more emphasis of public ownership, is it really can it really promote more innovations? China is now a very innovative country, and in some areas, technologies, R&D, equal or in some areas even more advanced than in developed countries. So it is becoming very innovative, but these ideas about the use of SOE or targeted industrial policies, can they really make Chinese economy companies more competitive or efficient? That is a kind of a question many people raise, and I hope that China will continue to follow WTO-based very open, liberalized investment and trade regime, and I think some ownership of financial institutions they are liberalizing, and also how to use SOEs, how to use the market function better. It should continue to be important subject of the Chinese economy. I spoke too much about China, but ASEAN, as I said, it is also growing very fast. And I live in Philippines, and there is a very strong consumption. And under President Duterte's initiative, build is kind of a hallmark of the Duterte administrations and ADB staff. I feel myself that Philippines is more committed to building more infrastructure more quickly. And we are supporting them how to design and plan, implement projects with the careful considerations about safeguard of environmental and social impact. I recently have had regular discussions with the Minister of Finance, Secretary of Finance, Dominguez, every month or every 2 months, including how to hold annual meeting of ADB next year, but also how we can support the infrastructure building of countries, including railways, subways. There is no subway in Manila, and they haven't started even building or designing detailed design or designs in any city of Asia now, including Hanoi. And of course, there are many subways in China and India, and Indonesia already has started building it. So Philippines also making serious efforts to invest in transport, energy, and so on. There are many difficult issues in Asia, including some security issues, Rakhine, and Philippines just declared the end of Marawi, the city of Mindano's takeover by the radical group, and it was ended, but we should have a reconstruction idea about it. Afghanistan is still facing security challenges, but we should continue to cooperate for keeping stability and security of the region, and that's why Asia could start growing very fast in 1980s, 90s, and onwards. Very quickly about any multilateral development banks, there is a lot of discussions about how to mobilize more capital resources, financial resources from private sector, and MDBs should be more innovative about catalyzing more resources instead of just using our capital or lending capacities. And there is a G20 initiative how to make MDB system more effective, and especially for catalyzing private sector resources. There is a huge financial need from Sustainable Development Goals and COP21 and infrastructure investment. And recent new research by the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of ADB estimated that Asian developed country needs $1.7 trillion a year for coming years for infrastructure investment in energy, transport, and water, and so on, including the elements of mitigation and adaptation for climate change. So we need more resources. And we should use more PPP, and ADBs and other MDBs, private sector lending should be used, expanded, because that has a stronger kind of leveraging impact compared to sovereign lending. If we provide lending and equity investment to private companies, there is more commercial co-financing from private banks and so on. And also PPP is important, and many countries, including Philippines and India and China, have been using this. But at the same time, PPP is not panacea, and there are several issues about PPP. And PPP is, by the way, to use private financing as well as private expertise, including managing such facilities like water or energies and so on, and build, operate, and transfer is one of the very typical PPPs. We should use it, and but at the same time, when we try to invite pension money, insurance, life insurance money to these projects, often there is an issue of regulatory kind of changes in the future, and also what is a dispute mechanism. And in addition, for foreign investors, there is an issue of a foreign exchange risk and the convertibility risk, whether they can send the money back to the investors after the investment is over. So although there is a lot of discussions about PPP, finding a good bankable project is not easy, especially for foreign investors. So we should be realistic. And also in China, there is a discussion that many PPPs, the counterpart of private sector is actually state-owned or local government-owned, or at least some ownership by public sectors. Are they really PPP, or it's more public sector investment? But at the same time, I wrote this as a kind of a essay recently, in a short essay in a magazine. PPP has been always, the private sector has been a very important players of public infrastructure investment for centuries. And most of Japanese railways were first built by private players, capitalists in late 19th century, and then they were more or less nationalized for security reasons or for connectivity reasons. But most of railways to connect Tokyo to central part of Japan or northern part, or between Yokohama and Tokyo, Hachioji, were developed by private capitalists to transport silk from inland region to coastal regions. Even in 17th century, Japanese Kyoto merchant asked shogunate whether he can develop water transportation by digging a river in Kyoto and to make a connection between Kyoto and kind of backyards, farming areas. And he got one-third as a maintenance cost of one-third of income by charging ships going. One-third becomes a maintenance cost, and one-third becomes a kind of contribution to shogunate or tax. And then one-third is for his family itself, and then it is reinvested in other projects all over Japan. So this is a very typical PPP idea. Concession is given by the shogunate or the government, but private player did the work. So I think in any countries, especially railways in the UK and England, they were developed by private companies. So it's very new, not new at all. It was even norm because the government until 19th century, until welfare state came, most of private activities, these activities should be by the private players. So we should encourage this kind of private investment further. And it can be done by domestic companies. In Manila, there is a new highway between airport and center of the city, and it makes our commuting to airport dramatically reduced to 30 minutes from Friday night, 2 hours disastrous kind of transportation. It is now expected that it will be 30 minutes because of this highway connecting center of Manila with the airport. And this was by San Miguel Beer Company. So this kind of opportunity should be further explored. By the way, I should speak. What is the time of my 5 more minutes? No question and answer. Okay, so 5 minutes including Q&A. So I should stop now. Sorry, I was not planning very well. But about today's topic, the private sector debt and also local finance. Again, one very interesting example is how China is trying to do this, and private sector debt should be managed. And I said I often said this, but I also talked to Minister Shao that the collaboration between central bank and regulators and Ministry of Finance is very important, and we shouldn't let just regulators regulate financial system in terms of stability. But these three institutions should be always cooperative, because central bank is a lender of last resort, and it has a monetary policy which affects asset price. So in my view, central bank target shouldn't be just a CPI, but also stability of the financial system. It is clearly stated in Bank of Japan law. And UK, in a sense, took back the authorities of regulating industry, financial industry, again from FSA to the central bank, because FSA of UK was not very effective to detect the instability in the system before Lloyd Bank had trouble, or Northern Rock was in trouble. So because the regulators are usually checking at the balance sheet of our banks and transactions, whether those are fair with the integrity or not. But usually central bank is looking at the payment system, where the payment is going smoothly, and what is the transactions, daily transactions of commercial banks, because central bank has accounts of those banks. So central bank should be clearly in charge, in addition to regulators. And the Ministry of Finance is also important because the Ministry of Finance is in charge of fiscal policies, and also when there is a crisis or to avoid crisis, sometimes we need to put capital, use the public taxpayers' money to recapitalize, strengthen the capital of banks to avoid crisis. And during the crisis, of course, they must step in to avoid a total debacle of the financial system. It's easy to say that let's let the go bankrupt if it's not sustainable. But if it happens, usually it causes a total run to any banks, and it would cause the total confusion of the financial system. So the Ministry of Finance role to decide, to consider the taxpayers' money's injection to bank system is very important. And also, in many countries, Ministry of Finance is in charge of such a policy-related institution like JBIC or Development Bank of Japan, and Chinese there are Exim Bank and development banks. And also, in case of China, even commercial banks, large commercial banks, very large or majority share of those banks are still owned by the government. So they have a strong connection to the strength of banks. So Ministry of Finance is important. And of course, regulators should always check the integrity of a business and balance sheet of banks. So we should still have yeah, I don't want to imagine it, but there can be some shocks or crises in countries, even for future, because of large capital flows between countries in this system. And in the Bretton system, capital movement was more restrained or controlled to keep a fixed exchange rate system, and the capital flow or capital account was more regulated and liberalized. But now the norm is that we should make a capital control as liberalized as possible, although with a good sequence and conditions. But if so happens, there is a big movement of capital from time to time, and how to manage it, and how to avoid a serious crisis. This will continue to be important issues, and that is one of the theme of today's discussion. And macro-prudential issues, in addition to micro-prudential issues, is very important. And if there is a fintech and a new innovative financing areas, how should we address it, and before we are becoming late? And local finance is a very important issue in China also. And in a sense, local authorities are given too much work to do with less revenues. And the idea of the Ministry of Finance of China is to strengthen the local authorities' taxing power by giving, for instance, property tax authority to local governments. And when I discussed this issue with Minister Shao again, he said that the immovable assets should be taxable things should be taxed by local authorities, and in accordance with the international practice, property tax should be local tax. And of course, China is also considering how to provide debt issuing authorities to local authorities with a certain management of the debt, and also how to share revenues between poor regions and rich regions, and how to do more work by the central government for welfare, for instance, pension and so on. It should be provided more by central government. So how to address local debt issues, revenue sharing, tax powers by local governments, and the debt management is very important. And also more work by the central government is idea. And at the same time, the central government is also trying to make the tax system more progressive by including more effective individual income tax. Today, the deduction is too much, and not many people are paying income tax, individual income tax, so they should have it. And also, inheritance tax should be introduced. So there are many interesting issues, and I spoke too much about China today because I had a very interesting discussion with the Chinese authorities. But I hope today's discussion will be very enlightening, interesting, informative, heated discussions. And once again, I'd like to congratulate. And also, I really thank the participants to come to this conference. Thank you very much.